this moment the scope of rural sociology. You recall in our last class, this particular topic was scheduled to be part of it, but after certain considerations, we decided to just postpone this particular lecture to give it a full attention as it deserves. So let's look at the scope of the rural sociology. At the end of this class, we should be able to list the scope of rural sociology, and then beyond listing the scope, we expect also that candidates should be able to critically discuss the scope of rural sociology. Now, on the scope, let's look at the rural population. Rural sociology takes a dive into understanding the rural population. The population residing in the geographical rural areas is the basic essence of rural sociology. Now, as a field of study, um, the study of rural sociology factors in the characteristics, the size, the density, and distribution of rural populations from various angles. Rural sociology aims at the study of the factors that influence the growth of rural population. Also, it looks at the effects of population growth on rural society. At this level, you must have heard about the concept of rural urban migration. Now, rural sociology also factors in rural urban migration. It looks at those aspects of rural urban migration that affects the rural people. It also tries to understand the behavioral patterns, prevailing customs, and folklores that dominate the day-to-day lives of rural population. Still on the scope of rural sociology also looks at the factors around rural community. Now, it's good that we remind us that rural community is considered as one of the primordial organizations of mankind. So, rural sociology is chiefly majorly concerned with the origin, nature, and characteristics of the life among this rural community. Rural sociology also studies the homogeneous trajectory of the rigid and conservative nature of people living in the rural areas when it comes to their customs, their traditions, their morals, values, and so on. Rural sociology is very much interested in that. Part of the scope also is the rural social organization. Here, we are talking about those organizations that play major roles as the backbone of the rural society, as well as also being the fulcrum, the anchor of their social life. The most important function of rural sociology, therefore, is to offer fundamental knowledge about rural social organizations. Rural social organizations envelops the spiritual lives, religious activities, sacred relationship, and divine notion of rebirth. We know there is this idea of is it reincarnation, that is also believed among the rural people. There is this idea of treating certain things as being sacred. Some fishes are not to be killed, some animals are not to be killed, but they are rather revered. These are issues around the rural social organization. Now, rural sociology for the Department of Rural Life studies the further perspective of rural social organizations and then the governing laws for its development. Everything about rural social organization is not negative. We must emphasize this. Everything about rural social organizations is not negative. There are a lot of positive things about rural social organizations, and as a field of study, rural sociology is very keen about that. Next is rural social institutions. Here we simply imply the known figures of processes that prevail among the relationships between the rural people. Now, rural sociology thus studies the structure, the characteristics, and the functions of rural social institutions. Rural social institutions comprise family, marriage, kingship, religion, and then there is the various caste systems. Now, rural sociology studies the sociological significance of these institutions in the rural context. For your mid-semester exam, we would want you to be able to identify up to 10. Okay, not for your mid-semester exam per se, not for your mid-semester exam per se, but just for your own knowledge. I would please request that you identify 10 good examples of rural social institutions. Now, still on the scope, we want to also highlight that the scope of rural sociology also factors in the rural economy. That is what we call the rural economy. That is a way the rural people run their economy, which is quite different from what you see in urban centers. For instance, you can't go to the rural areas to see someone selling cars. You don't go to rural areas to see someone um, selling keke or selling motorcycle. These are things you see in the urban areas. But when you go to the rural areas, they also have their own rural economy. Remember, we have highlighted earlier on, class, we have emphasized earlier on that the major occupation of the rural people is agriculture. So when we discuss rural economy, of course, it will center so much on agriculture. So we are saying simply that agriculture is the backbone of rural economy, and majority of rural population are absorbed in agriculture. They directly depend on agriculture for their livelihood and sustenance. Rural sociology therefore studies the causes and then looks at the reasons why agricultural development is not growing at optimal speed in rural areas. Rural sociology, as part of its scope, also looks at the reasons why farmers are not making adequate gain from their agricultural practices. So that's part of the scope of rural sociology when we discuss the rural economy. As we go ahead also on the scope of rural sociology, also let you know that rural sociology looks at the rural social process. Now, rural sociology also studies the two processes of rural social interaction, namely the conjunctive and the destructive. Now, rural conjunctive process includes cooperation, accommodation, and assimilation, while rural disjunctive process, on the other hand, will comprise of cooperation and conflicts. Thus, the nature, characteristics, and social importance of these processes are to be appropriately considered as the scope of rural sociology. Let's look at religion. Of course, we know there is no society without a religious life. The only differences we have is as it regards to whom we worship and how we worship whom we worship. But for every society, there is a religious life. In fact, to say that you are not religious is to be religious. To say I belong to no religion simply means you now belong to the religion of those who belong to no religion. So in the rural areas, there is the religious life over there. Hello, there is the religious life over there, and then it also influences what they do in rural areas. Religion plays a predominant role in the rural society, considered as the soul of rural people, and it is regarded as the chief acquaintance of rural life. You cannot discuss class, whatever you're going to do with the rural people, do not ignore their religious life. Especially when it comes to here in Africa, a whole lot depends on religion. The rural people blindly follow the religious ideas and values, consider worshiping as a prime duty. They see worshiping as a prime duty. Of course, with the intervention of Christianity, the core tradition of the rural people, which used to be the African traditional religion, is gradually dwindling. But that has not also in any way made the rural people. When we talk about climate change, and then for you in school, you are looking at the certain elements that predispose our society to climate change. For the rural people, in their own understanding, climate change may be a punishment from God or punishment from the gods. And then while you are campaigning for tree planting and other measures that will reduce the effect of the chlorofluorocarbons, the rural people are simply on their own saying, let's appease the gods, let's stop doing evil, let's make sacrifices. So their understanding is seriously influenced. Their understanding is seriously influenced by whatever the religious setup they find themselves. Rural sociology, in this context, must seriously not ignore the rural religion. We discuss rural culture. Now, culture refers to that complex whole which includes here knowledge, belief, moral, law, custom, and any other capabilities acquired by man as a member of a society. Now, rural culture is firmly rooted in rigid and conservative dogmas, and it is generally very stagnant in nature. Rural culture will include ancient customs, will include traditions, folkways, norms, mores, values, and so on. Now, rural sociology studies the complexity of rural culture, its different structural organizations, cultural patterns, cultural threats, and cultural lag in the rural context. The next is the rural social problems. In discussing the rural social problems, one of the important contexts of rural sociology will include this idea of discussing the rural social problems. Rural social problems are centered around socioeconomic conditions. There are political problems. There are cultural problems. There are ethnic and other problems that are even value based. Now, these problems generally will include poverty, unemployment, population growth, illiteracy, untouchability, etc. Rural sociology therefore studies the causes and evil effects of these problems and suggests measures for their eradication for the greater interest of the country at large. As these problems are rooted in the rural societies, that are also diverse from place to place. Now, the causes of this problem, the nature, the remedies may vary from one society to the other. So, in studying rural social problems, we will always be location specific and try to pin down every situation, every solution as it suits a certain community. Rural sociology tries to draw in similarities as well as differences between the problems that stem from various existing issues and as a discipline tries to provide viable remedies to it. Please, everyone in class, we want to thank you again for your time. This is where we'll end this session on the scope of rural sociology. Thank you.